Hi everyone, I hope I'm audible and visible to you. Could you just give me a quick yes if you can see and hear me? As soon as I get a yes from you guys, I'll start off. Awesome. So, welcome back to the session on Let's Talk Tokenization. And what we're going to talk about today is tokenizing carbon credits. Now, I understand that some of you may not understand or know what carbon credits are. So, let's start with some of the basics and then we'll go on to some of the tokenization aspects. And as always, whatever questions you have, please feel free to post them and I'll take them up soon. So, when we talk about global warming, so one of the biggest causes is greenhouse gas emissions. So, that's like a kind of air pollution which is increasing the Earth's temperature by trapping heat within the atmosphere. Now, when we talk about greenhouse gases, there are many of them like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, a lot of them which we would have even studied in school. Now, what the world is trying to do is to limit the global average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade over the pre-industrial levels. And to do that, there are various kinds of projects that are being set up. Now, one of the very important techniques that is being adopted globally is called as the carbon trading. So that's like a market-based system. So kind of visualize some kind of an exchange that is creating a financial incentive to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas that companies and others are emitting. So now that brings us to the first important term, which is a carbon credit. So what does a carbon credit mean? So it's like a value which is assigned for reducing or removing or avoiding 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's the term that we use. That whatever such kind of a pollutant you are removing from the atmosphere, we compare it to carbon dioxide. So it's called a carbon dioxide equivalent. So for every 1 ton of carbon dioxide that you are removing from the atmosphere or that you are avoiding from entering into it, that is what we call as one carbon credit. Any questions so far? I hope it's very clear. So now that what are the kind of projects that come under carbon credit or carbon reduction? So the first is what we call as the avoidance projects, and the second is what we call as the removal projects. So an avoidance project is something that reduces the volume of greenhouse gases that are being emitted into the atmosphere. So let's say that somebody designs a building which is very energy efficient and absolutely reduces the amount of energy which is being consumed. We would call that as an avoidance project because it is avoiding or reducing the amount of gas which is being emitted. And then there is something called removal, where we are removing the gases directly from the atmosphere. So let's say you plant a lot of trees, and those trees are going to remove the carbon or capture the carbon. That is what we will call as a removal project. I hope this part is clear, the difference between the two. Now, why is this important for us to understand? Because a removal credit has more premium when it is trading in the markets as compared to avoidance credit. And the reason for that is there are three reasons really. So, one is that for this removal kind of thing, a higher level of investment is required. Secondly, there is more demand for it, and it is considered a more powerful tool in the fight against climate change. So that's the reason you will see usually when you look at the prices of carbon credits, the removal credits have more of a premium. Now let's talk a little bit about the pricing. So when we look at the carbon credit market globally, the price of one carbon credit, it can go from few cents all the way up to $300 per ton. So usually we see that when it is an afforestation, reforestation kind of project, it's 15 to $20 per metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. And when we talk about technology-based removal projects, it could go all the way up to $300 also. Now, when we talk about the factors, like what are the factors based on which the pricing of a carbon credit is determined? So there are usually four things that we consider. First, the geography, that is where is it located? Second, what type of project, the removal versus avoidance. Third, what is the vintage or age? And fourth, what is the volume of carbon credits that can be traded at a particular time? Now, some international agencies have calculated that by about 2030, the total carbon credit market in the world will be about $50 billion. Now, I'd like to specifically talk a little bit about the Indian law because India is one of the few and the first countries in the world which has come out with a very detailed law around carbon credits. So, now there are two Indian laws that are relevant, and in fact, while speaking, I'm going to key them in also. The first is what we call as the Energy Conservation Act of 2001. Now, this is an old act, but it has been amended recently. And the second is what we call as the Carbon Credit or the Trading Scheme, which came out just about 28th of June. So it's barely been 3 weeks since that has come out. Now, if we look at the act which is there, now the government can appoint a body to issue energy saving certificates to consumers whose energy consumption is less than the prescribed norm. So let's try to understand how this would work. So let's say there is a steel company, and the government tells the steel company that you are allowed to emit X amount. Now, if they emit more less than that, suppose they emit 90 and they are allowed to emit 100 tons. So for the 10 tons that they are reducing, they are given 10 tons of carbon credits, which they can then sell to somebody else. Right? So somebody who is consuming more, suppose they are supposed to emit 100, but they are emitting 110, they can then buy this 10 tons from the steel company. And then, of course, anybody in the world is free to purchase carbon credit certificates on a voluntary basis. So, suppose I want to give a birthday gift to my friends. Well, instead of buying something for them, I could buy carbon credits and gift it to them. So, my friend knows that, okay, the money that I have spent on the birthday gift has resulted in some amount of reduction of pollution or global warming. So that's open to everyone, the voluntary system. Anybody globally is free to buy and sell those credits. Any questions so far? I know this is a kind of a complex new topic for many people, but some of you may be working in this direction. Now, personally, I am very bullish on solar energy. So the way I look at it, for example, I live in a society and we recently spent a lot of money to put up the solar panels on our terrace. So that absorbs the sunlight and then it generates electricity which we can use for the common area lighting or the lifts and other things. Now, ideally, once the law is actually implemented, buildings like ours should be able to then issue carbon credits depending upon the amount of solar energy that we have generated. And that carbon credit can be sold, and the society can get remunerated or reimbursed for some of the expenditure that we have done to set up the solar panels because they cost a lot of money to actually set up. So, like this, now there are hundreds and hundreds of projects globally that are going on. But there are some very fundamental flaws and problems so far. By the way, I hope it's all clear and everyone's able to understand everything. Yeah, okay. I have a question from Nitish, which is energy trading and carbon credit trading same concept? So no, it is not the same concept. It is different concept. So when we talk about energy trading, we are talking about things like electricity or solar power generated electricity being traded within people. So I'm selling electricity, you're buying it from me. Carbon credits, on the other hand, is the trading of these certificates which are issued because somebody is doing something to reduce the pollution. So they are two kind of very different concepts. I hope that answers your question, Nitish. Now, one of the biggest problems that we find in the carbon credit world today is the certifiers. So, for example, I forget the name of this. I think Vera is one of the organizations globally, or Gold Standard, and there are several such organizations who certify projects. So let's say you have set up a carbon reducing project. Now somebody has to certify how much of carbon that is actually saving. Now the problem which is happening today is the people certifying you are being paid by you. So there is a kind of conflict of interest that they are going to certify you because they're getting paid by you. Now, in the very recent past, one very large global certifier, the media did an investigative journalism. I think it was the Guardian which did that, and they found that they were actually kind of selling the carbon credits, or they were giving it to people who didn't deserve the amount which is being given. Then one large company realized that 90% of the carbon credits they had bought actually were useless. So that is one problem today, where the certifier, which is like an auditor, the auditor is not correctly checking. It's kind of like in a school, if you are directly paying your teacher a salary, the teacher will probably be motivated to give you more marks. So it's something similar to that, where you are paying the auditor, so the auditor ends up giving you a higher certification. So that is one problem which we need to solve, and that is kind of where the blockchain can come into the picture. That if we put transparently, we put all the entire flow, right from all the expenditure that has been done to create the project, all the audit certificates, if all of that is transparently made available, then anybody can check whether the audit is done correctly, whether the amount of carbon credits being created are correct, and then people like you and me or other larger companies and all can trade in these carbon credits. uh, okay, interesting question from Lee, which is that if I buy 100 carbon credits, where do I store them? So that's a good question. So it would depend upon the platform and in what format they give you. So there are some places in which you could actually get paper-based certificates, which you could then sell to somebody else. But the world is moving into digital platforms. So in digital platforms, whether they are blockchain or non-blockchain enabled, there would be wallets. And in those wallets, you can actually store your carbon credits and then subsequently sell it to someone. Like for example, even today, there are a lot of brokers or intermediaries. They buy a large number of such carbon credits, hold it with them, and then find the companies who need it and then sell it to them and make a profit on that. Now, another very weird problem that happens is in some cases it has been found that these middlemen are keeping more than 90% of the value. So the actual amount of the carbon credit is not going to the people running the project. And again, that's a stupid thing because nobody will be then motivated to set up such kind of projects. So these are two problems that blockchain could probably solve. One is making it transparent so that we know for sure that the auditors are doing their job correctly. And secondly, is that this kind of huge amount of margins being taken away will not happen. So if we set up blockchain based platforms for this, then that would solve this problem to a great extent. Let me see if anybody else has question. Okay. This is another question I think Aditya has asked. How do you verify these offsets? So, like I said, as of today, what happens is you trust the auditor. Now, when we look at the Indian law which has come in, so there the government is appointing an agency, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and then they would license these auditors and they would then issue the certification. So we'd kind of trust it or verify it if it has come from one of these government approved auditors. Another question is obviously what if somebody starts to issue fakes, or how do you verify whether they are genuine? Again, like I said, one solution that I see is blockchain, which can make it transparent and avoid the double spending. So let's say that there is this one global blockchain platform which does it. Now every company has an account on it and it is clearly visible how much carbon credits they've issued in a year. So any government can also audit and make sure that it is the correct amount. And once it is sold to someone, then that carbon credit cannot be sold to anyone again. That doesn't happen today because there is no one single platform. There are dozens of different platforms, so nobody really knows what is happening. Uh, Aditya says something like Vira registry. Yeah, sure. But Aditya, what the problem is, like Vira is one, gold standard is another. There are, I don't know, more than 10 or 15 that I'm aware of, which are in this. So as of today, because there are so many different registries which are not connected to each other, some people could actually list the same carbon credit on multiple registries, sell it 10 times and make 10 times the money. And that doesn't kind of solve the problem that we all started out to solve. And that's the reason I believe there is a need for a single platform to come in. Now, another thing, when we look at the Indian law, what they've said in that is the energy trading exchanges will be allowed to do this trading. So now, as of right now in India, there are about three of them, and I think one of them controls 98% of the business. So here again, if there are three licensed such exchanges, then maybe that can reduce the double spending or the double trading that can happen. But ideally, I believe in the long run, globally, there has to be one platform that everybody agrees on. And ideally, blockchain technology would make that easy. And then hundreds of registries around the world could tap into that blockchain, and the blockchain could serve as the single source of truth, making sure that no carbon credit is double traded. And hundreds of exchanges can all link to that blockchain. Ketan has an interesting question. Let me read it out. Will Vera come up with their own Web3 tokens in future? It's quite possible that they would. Like Vera, there are other agencies also which could do that. Sure, that's possible. Let me take another question. Aditya says that my startup is also in the carbon credit marketplace. Oh, that's very nice. So, Aditya, if I had known that earlier, I would have maybe invited you to speak and give this session along with me. But no problem. Maybe you could tell us more about what you're doing. You could key that in as a comment so other people listening in can have a look at your website. Do let us know whether your project is already live or at what stage it is and which country you are actually doing this from. In the meanwhile, does anybody else have any questions? If you have any other confusions about how the carbon credit concept works, you can also put that in. Okay, Aditya says he'll DM it to me. Sure, Aditya, let me have a look at that. Sounds good. Uh, Anything else that you guys would like to know about? So last time I think we had talked about real estate, and this time we've spoken about carbon credits. So Acha, Aditya's project is at a pre-incubation stage. Anyway, anybody else globally who's working on tokenizing carbon credits, do get in touch with me. I'll help you out for sure. I've also announced something called the 30-day blockchain sprint, which means that if you are doing any kind of blockchain-based tokenization project, whatever in the world you are tokenizing, get in touch with me. And if it makes sense, we'll try to get you to the MVP stage, the minimum viable product stage, at kind of a zero cost. So if you have some interesting idea that you're working on, get in touch with me, ideally on LinkedIn, and I'll be able to kind of discuss it and take it forward with you. And also do let me know what kind of an asset you'd like me to talk about next time. Ideally, I'll be speaking about copyright licenses in movies, books, software, and others, and music and other such kind of things. I'm also going to be doing another session very soon on tokenization of whiskey, which is one of the projects that I'm personally working on. So that project has almost reached the stage where very soon our first cask or barrel of whiskey is going to be available for tokenization. So very soon I'm going to be doing a session on that also. This is Matimu and from Kenya. And how do you move carbon from off-chain to on-chain? Yeah, sure. That's an interesting question. So what we're doing here is there are what we've got to understand is that the project which is reducing the carbon emission or avoiding it, that's off-chain. What we are bringing on chain are only those certificates. So in today's day and age, it is these third party auditors who issue the certificates. In some cases, the project issues its own certificate, or in cases like India and other countries where we have the compliance market, the government approved people would issue the certificate. It is only that certificate that we can move on to the chain, nothing else. Now, here I'd like to talk about there are two kinds of markets in the world today. One is what we call as a compliance market, and the second is what we call as a voluntary market. Now, in the voluntary market, it's people who voluntarily want to buy and sell credits. And in the compliance market, it is where there is a very clear law and there is a regulatory framework. And under that, people are buying and selling. So, in India, what is now being set up is the compliance market with the full regulatory framework. So, Matimu, to answer your question, it is only those credits which are being moved on the chain, nothing else. Everything else is going to be off chain. Only the documents relating to those can be moved on the chain. I hope that answered your question. Anything else you guys would like to know about? Let me see if why voluntary carbon market share is increasing now. Yeah, that's a very good point. So let me ask you a question. Normally, as a normal human being, are you beginning to see the impact of global warming in the world? Are you noticing that the rain patterns are changing? It's becoming extremely hot in some places where it was never that hot. Give me a quick yes if you guys have actually noticed that. Can you give me a quick yes if you feel that you're noticing it? So I'm sure a lot of you are seeing that to happen. So now when you go and buy any product, right? You as a normal citizen also want to see that that particular seller or manufacturer is doing their job to reduce carbon emissions, right? So that's where the voluntary come in, where customers like you and me who feel about this issue buy products of those companies which are actually doing their job and reducing carbon emissions. So I'm nice to see all of you saying yes to this. So that is where the voluntary market comes in. So let's say that maybe I'm an airline, right? Now, along with the ticket, if I can tell you that, look, I'm buying X amount of carbon credits and reducing my carbon uh, which I'm releasing into the air. So I'm reducing it by XYZ. Are you as a customer more likely to buy that airline's tickets or that company's products? And like most of you are saying, yes, that's the reason the voluntary market is going up. So people who feel about the issue are now actually basing their buying decisions about which product to buy depending upon how good or bad that company's carbon record is. And that's the reason carbon voluntary markets are growing a lot. So that was a good question from Ketan. So I hope that answered it. Madhimu wants to know, does the tokenized carbon credit price fluctuate? Yes, it does. So like I told you, the price could be varying from few cents all the way up to $300 per ton. So there's a huge difference in pricing. And yes, there is a little bit of fluctuation that happens in any kind of financial asset also. Which ERC version is suitable for this kind of tokenization? That's a good question. Uh, so now again, it would depend upon how we break this down. So let's say that one particular project generates 1,000 tons of carbon credits. So we could create an ERC20 token, and that could have 20 units, and then those could be sold. So that's one option. So not 20, let's say it has 1,000 tons, so 1,000 units of that. Another way to look at it is if the amount being emitted is small, then we could do ERC 721. But the problem is, if for every ton we are using one token, then the cost goes up. The cost of creating the token is there, and then there is a cost of transfer every time. So, and as a large company, if I want to buy carbon credits, I cannot buy one at a time, right? That's just not going to be feasible. I may need thousands of them minimum. So, I would say it is much better to take large projects and to actually do it in the way like as an ERC20 token. So, let's say that there is, you're an aggregator. So, you've bought a lot of these credits from multiple projects, you aggregate it and then say issue 1 million tons. So you issue an ERC20 token with a supply of 1 million, and then people can come and buy as many as they want. So those are the two ways in which it could be done. So that was a nice question from Rakesh. Okay, there's a question from Santosh about what would the blockchain jobs opening be in future. So that is not Santosh. I'd probably take that in another session. Today is only about carbon credits. Aditya wants to know about off-chain verification of these offsets. So that's a good point again. Now, because the activity or the project is off-chain, obviously, and the person buying it is then going to display it to their customers again in an off-chain. So we've got to kind of connect the two. That is where we would use off-chain data storage. So ideally, all these documents, one is they could be stored off-chain on the blockchain, I mean connected to it, or it could be a separate IPFS kind of a node where we store this data, but then the links are made available so we can verify the entire stream of documents. I hope that answers your question. Can you please share some good case study? So Mayank, I'm not sure what you meant. Do you meant as a case study on carbon credits? There are a lot of them that are available. So the United Nations also comes out with a lot of documents. Very recently, Citibank came out with an interesting document on this, where they've actually gone into a lot of these case studies. I'll also share some. Sure, that's a good idea. I'll do that. Is there a tokenized carbon credits marketplace? That's a good question. So, as of right now, there are a few projects that I keep hearing about that are working in this direction. I'm not aware of any project which has gone live with a blockchain based carbon credit marketplace. There are many of them which are non blockchain based, those are already live, so you could just Google them and you'll find a very large number of them. But blockchain based, I'm not aware of anyone having gone live. I do hear of some projects thinking about it and working, but they are not yet live. Let's see Madhamu's question. Does it mean NFT digital certificate issues also tokenized? Yes, sure, you could use NFT certificates. See, NFT ultimately is just non-fungible tokens. So it all depends upon what is the asset you're tokenizing. Now, ideally speaking, if an asset is singular, then you would use an NFT. So Ultimately, it depends what is the meaning of the word fungible. In finance, something is fungible when multiple units of the same thing are identical to each other. Classic example being e-money in your mobile wallet. So if you have $200, each dollar is equal to the other dollar. There's no difference. So that is what we call as fungible. Now again in carbon credits, if there is a set of say 100 tons, which is identical coming from the same project at the same time, well, those can be bundled and called fungible. But if it's different from each other, then we would use non-fungible. But non-fungible always ends up to be more expensive. Can we off-ramp tokenize carbon credits to local fiat currency? Yes, you can. So this is primarily, I mean, the tech on this is very simple. It's basically the legal part that you need to take into account. So depending upon whichever country you are doing this, you would need to make sure that the laws of that country permit this. Like for example, in India, if compliance market is being set up by the government and the government says these are the only people allowed to set up an exchange, then you can't do it unless you get licensed by the government. If you are in a country where there is no such law, then of course there is no legal problem and you can definitely do that. So my strong advice would be to make sure that you do not end up violating the regulatory aspects here. My next question, is there any way the on-chain verification of offline data can be stored using permission network? Yes, it can. So we've just got to remember something, that when we put data into the chain, it's automatically going to get distributed to all the nodes. Now, permission blockchains specifically set up on the multi-chain kind of frameworks can do up to 64 MB of data per block. But it's not a very good idea to put too much data into it because you're just going to spread it across hundreds of nodes. So ideal situation, we try to keep the data storage on chain as little as possible. Uh, Matimu has an interesting question. Does it mean tokenized carbon credits will have a different price in different countries? So for the same credit, no, it would be the same, but for different projects, the pricing changes. So for example, I was giving you an example that when we look at an afforestation or reforestation kind of project, the price goes from $15 to $20. But when we look at technology based removal projects, the price could go from $100 to $300. So if there is a particular afforestation project, and let's say it's valued at $20, then ideally globally the value is 20, because it doesn't matter where you are located as the buyer, it matters where the project is. Now the project is in that X country and you're buying it, so you would buy it at $20 no matter where you are. Similarly, if it's a tech based removal project, you are buying it from any country in the world, shouldn't matter, you would pay a fixed price for it, which is about $100 to $300 today. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's kind of more or less about it. So awesome. So I'll see you guys next week, and we'll pick up a topic on tokenization of copyright licenses. So any of you who are working on tokenization projects, do get in touch with me so that during these weekly sessions that we do every Friday, 3 p.m. India time, I'll invite some of you over also. So, you can be part of this discussion and talk about your project. Don't worry, there's no charge for it. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of the other platforms. Aditya has a question. Could the fragmented market of credits be under a same technology? Yeah, ideally, that's how it should be. So I believe that technology can unify this entirely fragmented market. And another very important point is today there's no transparency about the pricing. Different platforms show very different pricing. So I believe it's high time everything came into one platform. Rakesh has an interesting question. Does carbon credits have an expiry? No, they don't actually. They expire when they're consumed. So let's take an example. If I run a polluting factory and I'm supposed to, I've polluted 100 tons extra. Now the moment, and that's per year, the quota is with me. So when I buy these 100 credits and I offset it in this year, then it is expired. Otherwise, I could hold it and offset it next year. But once it is offset, then it is supposed to be destroyed. It is not supposed to be used again. And if you use it again, then that's what we call as double spending. If we issue ERC20 tokens, how will we differentiate quality of one project for another? Yeah, so when I say ERC20 here, I'm not saying all the carbon credits of the projects would come into one ERC20. No. Suppose there is one project which is generating millions, that's one ERC20 token. Another one is another ERC20 token. So you could call this particular coin as India Afforestation Project 1, and that's one ERC20 token which could have million units. Somebody else sets up another one, let's say in Kenya, they would say Kenya Afforestation Project 1, and they would issue their own ERC. So there would be multiple ERC20 tokens. I'm not saying the whole world has one ERC20. Every project could be a distinct ERC20 token. So Ketan, that was an interesting question, and I hope you understood my answer. Anything else? Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you guys next week, and do reach out to me if you'd like to be part of the show. And if you have any suggestions, any questions, just feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. See you. Bye bye.